Thanks for joining us. Thanks for signing up and registering. Yeah, fingers crossed the technology works really well. We've got an interesting, very first webinar for you. We're going to be focused today on textiles EPR. So this is a stuff for life guide to textiles and all the things EPR. We aren't going to do huge amounts of speculative, sort of future casting or even massive detail on the ins and outs of what an EPR scheme is or could be. But certainly some of the principles and some of the big issues we're going to discuss today. So we have a fantastic panel for you. Where's the, here we are, there we go. So there's me, which is lovely. We've got Susie Tomson from Think Beyond. We have Jim Harbidge from Arco. We've got Ruth Miller from British Cycling and David Hughes from Teesside University. And I'm sure they will give you a very brief intro, but we're all on LinkedIn. You can find out more about us on there, or what's made public anyway. And and get in touch with people directly if you want to speak to them in more detail. But we've all got lots of different experience around these issues. And we will go into that detail in just some of that detail and background in just a second. So very brief housekeeping. There are no fire alarms planned, not here anyway. Maybe there are at your places. So if there are, follow your own rules. Practical jokes are over because you can only do April Fools until lunchtime, until midday. So that's what I was told anyway. So there are no jokes. Well, none April Fools wise. There might be some humorous moments. You never know your luck. But practical jokes are over for another year. Thank goodness. Please use the Q&A function. It will be in the bottom toolbar. I would expect for most people, it might be in the top for some of you, but yeah, there's a Q&A function. There is a chat function, which I may have not remembered to enable, but the Q&A function should be working. But we'll double check that in a second. In fact, Steve King, if you can check that, that'd be amazing. Yeah, sit tight for the next 55 or so minutes. And we will get cracking into the presentation. So yeah, don't forget, sorry, the Q&A function. Get your questions in. There's a good half an hour at least for Q&A and discussion. So yeah, please get those questions in as soon as you feel ready. Okay. So a very brief summary in 4 bullet points, which is a record even for me. You can find out a bit more on our website, and of course there's a thing called Google and other search engines that will give you loads of background. But there's there is a brief summary on our website. The link is down at the bottom of the page there. So why is this important? Well, textiles cause significant impacts. How is that the case? It depends on where, why, and how they're made. So lots of detailed issues around how things are made, where they're made, what they're made from, why they're made, the purpose, etc. Things around design, longevity, resilience, materials, simplification or complication, and so on. We'll cover some of that today, but not much. The EU has an agreed position on textiles for EPR for member states. Obviously, we're outside of that, but a lot of organizations trading, across Europe will also be trading here and vice versa. They will be affected and impacted. And of course, our view, my view very much so, is we need to be getting on with this here as well. And there's no reason not to. And in fact, there's plenty that we can be getting on with and already are getting on with anyway. So without any further ado, after a lovely graphic, which shows you a nice hierarchy of what we really ought to be focusing on and concentrating our major efforts on, which is around reuse and laundry and design for longevity and those sorts of aspects, which is work that's ongoing by some. Repair, rebrand and debrand, some work we've been doing. And then, of course, ultimately recycling material. And I would say as well, really important to have that demand draw through in terms of recycled content back into new products. So those are the fundamentals of not just the waste hierarchy, but the circular economy, which again, we'll be talking about this webinar and in future webinars as well. So we call all of this Wear Your Commitment. Let's get on and hear from our panelists. So first up, Susie, over to you. Susie Tomson from Think Beyond.
Yeah, thanks, John, and great to be here. So thanks for inviting and having and putting this together, because it's a really important topic. So as John said, I work for Think Beyond. I'm head of insights and impact at Think Beyond, and we're a sustainability and social impact consultancy working in and through sport. And I've worked as a sustainability professional now for over 30 years, and 20 years of that I've been working with sports organisations. So trying to help them become more sustainable, trying to help them work out what the right things to do are. And fundamentally, why is sustainability in the supply chain important? What we buy has the biggest impact, but it's also got the biggest opportunity. And sustainability in the supply chain is probably one of the most impactful actions an organisation can take and an individual can take, but it's probably one of the last ones they tackle. And quite often we hear in the work that we do, like, it's really tough, or we have no control over it. But 90% of a company's impact on the environment actually comes from supply chain. So when we sit down with clients, and you'll hear from Ruth and the work that they've done with John and things as well, like, they're actually tackling that supply chain thing. And what we say is there's 5 questions that we really need answers to. And if you can't answer one of those questions, then you need to dig into your supply chain a bit further. And these are, where does it come from, and who made it? Do you actually know the people? Do you know the conditions that they're making the piece of kit, equipment, whatever it is? Where does it come from? And how far is it coming as well in that piece? What is it made of? So what actually is the material, and how was that made? Because is it polluting? Is it a polluting type of material? Is it polluting type of substance? Can it be reused? What is it wrapped in as well? So number 3 here, what is it wrapped in? The packaging around that, what's going to happen to that? Do you just rip it open and throw it away, or is it actually something that has a reuse value afterwards? Can it be recycled? To John's hierarchy pyramid, exactly that we need to be going through and testing ourselves. And what impact does it have in use? Is that washing? John mentioned laundry. Actually, is that as a branding vehicle, like sports clothing, actually is a huge billboard for advertising. So what impact is it going to have in use? Not just in terms of maybe its emissions, maybe it requires energy or whatever it is, but what impact does it have in use, and do we know that? And then what are you going to do after you've used it? Is that the end of life for it? Does it mean it gets thrown away, recycled, or actually can it still be used by someone else? So those are the 5 questions that we take people through and really challenge people to have answers to. And the next slide, so we can scooch to the next slide. So focusing really on fashion and sport and marketing, and these are huge industries that we know of and that we're going to kind of dig into today, like why fashion and textiles. And these are some numbers that I dug out just to set the scene and put the context. Total greenhouse gas emissions from textile production is 1.2 billion tonnes. Big number, sounds like a big number. It is a big number. It's actually 10% of global carbon emissions. That is a huge number. And textile production emissions are expected to rise by 60%. We've signed up to net zero targets. We know we have to hit net zero by 2050. By 2030, we're saying that we should have had a 50% reduction in carbon emissions, not a 60% increase. So this actually is a massive red flag and a big challenge. The other challenge around it, not just carbon, water consumption. When we look at textiles, 1 in 3 people globally lack access to fresh drinking water, safe drinking water. And when you look at just a pair of jeans, it takes 4,500 litres to make 1 pair of jeans. That goes into the production of it, into the growing of the cotton and the production of the actual fibres and the materials. That is equivalent of 5 years of 1 human's drinking water. Like, just put these things in context. And then every year, 85% of textiles end up in landfill or incinerated. Like, how are we reusing them? What is our reuse purpose? How are we going to take that material, not lose it? And the worst stat I found was 30% of clothing produced is actually never sold. It's overproduced, overproduction, never gets sold. So it is brand new. Why sport? And this is the platform. This is why I've spent the last 20 years of my career working in sport, is that powerful platform to drive change. We did a recent survey where 68% of sports fans, 92% of professionals agree that it reflects well on a brand that partners with social change and sustainability. So sport is struggling to try and get brands associated with it. They're really positioning themselves to be something more than just an entertainment spectacle, more than just human endeavour. What does that mean? That means delivering something that is really positive for society. And in that turn, they're then looking to align with brands and that have those same sustainability credentials. So there's lots of partnerships that we're seeing. It's increasing in number, and sport is really at that front end of being able to do that, to try and get rid of some of this 30% clothes never sold. How do we tackle the 10% of global carbon emissions and the water consumption as well? So that hopefully helps set the scene a little bit, and I'll hand over to the next person.
Thanks, Susie. That's brilliant. Yeah, some really big stats in there, big facts, and some scary stuff. I mean, 60% increase when we're trying to reduce is just incredible, really. So yeah, that's why it's important. Right. So we'll move on to Jim. Over to you, Jim, from Arco.
Thanks, John. Yeah, a bit about Arco first. Arco are a 140-year-old Hull-based business. Our role really is where we sell about 22,000 products and services, including training, things like first aid, confined spaces, and we're the biggest supplier in that market in the UK right now. We supply to North Sea, offshore, marine, construction, power generation, food, manufacturing, where whatever you can think of that needs a safety product service around it. Arco are likely to be in that market. If you're not familiar with our products, and forgive the blur, but you get the point when you see the color. But this is an example of something we spent quite a long time thinking about in terms of its circularity, what it's made from, whether it can be recycled at the end of its life, but also during its life, whether it can be repaired but still remain comfortable, performing, safe in the way that happens. Even down to things like the reflective tapes, which are sort of chevrons, if you can see those, so they're articulating. They remain with you and they move with you as you're working. We know that the biggest causes of items being thrown away is that they don't fit, or they're uncomfortable, or they wear out. So there's a big focus on durability with better fabrics which are certified to last a certain number of wears or washes. And we're unusual in what we do in that we have a SATRA accredited safety laboratory, so that we are able to put the testing and the certification around those products. Just a little bit, speaking after Susie's points there, we manufacture in 80 countries around the world, and some of the suppliers that we deal with, they've been with us for over 30 years. So we've got an intimate knowledge of those supply chains and some of the ethical issues around supply. And just as recently as last year, I've been in Sri Lanka and China, in forests that produce rubber, looking at deforestation risks, looking at biodiversity, looking at soil use loss. So sustainability is integral to what we do and what we sell, and what Arco stands for as a family business. Those products, the orange that you've just seen, they're largely designed in-house. That's really important for us. We don't just go and buy on the market and resell, but it gives us that opportunity to really think about issues that cause end of life or garment end of life quickly, things like comfort, fit, material selection, and increasingly around decarbonisation. Arco have just had a science-based target approved, and around 41% of our carbon footprint and our customers' carbon footprint from stuff they buy is from textiles alone. That's just a small part of those 22,000 products. So thinking about carbon and circularity at the design stage for us is really where sustainability and circularity happens. And it's really important that we get that right. Just a couple of points about what we use. Polyester, it features very heavily in what we do. Weatherwear, harnesses, gloves, shoes, clothing, all made of polyester, but also we've got a range of natural materials like the rubber I mentioned, cotton and leather, and all of those products equally have opportunities around better carbon performance and sustainability. And maybe just a final bit about me. I mean, my background as head of sustainability at Arco. It's a role I've been in now for nearly 3 years. My job, if you like, and I've given this to myself rather than it being part of the job description, but it's to turn a linear business, essentially a linear business, into a circular one. And I think we're doing pretty well. But previously, I've worked for transport for Virgin Group, and my last role, I've been looking at low carbon interventions for animal genetics to cope with climate change as part of Genus PLC. So sustainability, I think, can take you a number of roles, but this is a really exciting one, and one I'm glad to support within this initiative. Thanks, John.
Cheers, Jim. That's mega. Yeah, and it was great fun working on the design of those responsible high-vis jackets and other garments with David, who we'll hear from in a minute, actually. So yes, thanks, Jim. So let's go on now to Ruth Miller from British Cycling. Over to you, Ruth.
Thanks, John, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to have you all on the call. Ruth Miller, Head of Business Planning at British Cycling, and I guess just a bit about me. I am not a sustainability expert or a sustainability manager, but at British Cycling, I definitely did put up my hand to help take a lead and take a lead as we work towards our first sustainability strategy, but not just our first sustainability strategy, but what we're actually going to do, and more importantly, what we're going to actually do first. So just as a bit of context, we launched our first ever environmental sustainability strategy, and we engaged Think Beyond with Susie and her team and John's input as well to help us shape that. And we defined it and framed it in 3 areas. One was to reduce the impact for operations. Secondly, we chose to really focus on events as providing some of our most visible moments and have high relevance to our communities and stakeholders. And thirdly, we are cycling, so we are the power of the bike. So we certainly have a role in terms of that wider sort of behaviour change piece as well, and something we're cracking on with at the minute. So I guess as part of that, we did measure and put in the middle of the screen, which backs up some of what Susie was saying about the huge amount for us of our footprint that's in our supply chain. And I guess within that context, a large percentage that is actually directly associated with clothing. We buy and use thousands of items per year, both off bike. I'm wearing a corporate, I guess, example at the minute, but also, as you'll see on your TV screens, and in the media, we've got a huge amount of kit that is actually on bike as well, that we procure, which is highly specialist in some ways. A few examples of our other work, so before I come back to clothing. So in terms of events, a couple of things we've done. We have launched a sustainable events fund, and alongside it, environmental event guidance, so that our communities can really engage on this topic. And we've also given them some tangible examples, and we've given them a fund to bid into, and that's in progress at the minute. We'll look to wrap that up towards the second half of this year. Also started to do a little bit in our most visible moments, so things like the hybrid fleet at the Tour of Britain as our biggest event of the year. And just starting in that campaign and behaviour change work, you may have seen our commitment to social impact recently as part of our new strategy, and some of the campaigns we're also partnering with at the moment. So back to supply chain and what we're doing there. Procurement, a huge thing. So we've really been engaging with our supply chain and picked off, I guess, the top 10 to start with, to have conversations and surveys and understand them better, which has led to excellent progress in terms of both progressing those conversations about what people are doing now, but also influencing and making better decisions for the future. So within this bucket then, we really looked at some tangible projects or initiatives we could take. And as I said at the bottom, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. So what would that step be for us in this sort of clothing and carbon space? And John, if you want to move on. So what we did was, and the problem we were trying to solve is we had moved sponsor, which sports do from time to time. And one of our old sponsors, HSBC, was still present in a lot of clothing we knew, which is both in our communities, in our staff personal clothing cupboards, and also in a few containers out the back of the National Cycling Centre in Manchester. So we had both an opportunity with a volunteer roadshow, which was about to happen around the country, to try and collect some of this kit, and also the opportunity through our own colleagues to see what they had and could bring in at a staff engagement day that was upcoming, and have a good audit of what was in our containers. So with all that going on, which is a great opportunity to start to talk to our members as well, out and about around the country, we collected in 600 initial items to audit and then engage with Stuff for Life to look at what we might actually do with them. So they conducted that part of the story for us, and out of that, defined that there was 60% by weight, which could be rebranded. So you'll see some examples of sort of overstitching and also patching that we used to repurpose them. And what we did then was set up a direct sell back to our communities and offer that direct to our clubs and community groups on the ground to purchase these items, with the aim of, well, it's a pilot, so we didn't really know where we're going to be land from a cost perspective, but as you'll see at the minute, we're looking around a 3k resale value and looking to cover our costs of the whole end-to-end process, which would be fantastic, but not the ultimate aim. But anything we did, ideal, let's try and cover our costs and first go, but actually we wanted to get to about 50-50 was our aim. So we're looking at pretty good on that front, with lots of earnings on the way. This isn't fully wrapped up at the minute, but we're still got a few bits to tie up. But initial estimate through John and the team, looking at 31k of social impact, and definitely we're confident on 0 to landfill through the rebrand, repurpose, and a little bit of recycle down the bottom. So I guess that's a bit of a whistle stop tour, and we can come back to some questions, but hopefully gives you a bit of insight to what we've been doing. And I guess now is the important bit. It will be in the next sort of month or so, is taking the learnings from this and looking how we apply it to some of the other work that's going on in this space with our performance clothing, for example, what we do with chamois, the bit you sit on a bike, and what might happen to that, through to staff kit sales as well, which we've benefited from ourselves to look at some of that repurposed on-bike kit. So journey of 1,000 miles begins with single steps. We've taken a few, we've plenty more to do. We're learning as we go, and it's just been a great opportunity to share, of which this is a part. And that's me for now, I think, John.
Thanks very much, Ruth. Yeah, good stuff. It was good fun as well. And I think just to add to that, very one brief point, most of it sold in a couple of weeks. So, yeah. Clearly there's interest in, not second best, absolutely. Second time, second chance, second go. It was all unused, stuff that was sold, and it has a value. And I think, it really underlines the difference between cost and value, which is a really important part of, the mindset around procurement, as well as those who are buying and using clothes, garments, sportswear, and whatever. Right, moving on. So over to you, David.
Brilliant, thanks, John. Yeah, nice to meet you all. My name's Professor David Hughes from Teesside University. I lead CERIC, which stands for the Circular Economy and Recycling Innovation Centre. So I'm the sort of the technical voice today in terms of how we can approach EPR and what that looks like and what the infrastructure really is. And at the outset, it's probably worth saying there are some really good pockets of innovation across the UK in textile reuse, fibre recovery, sorting, but fundamentally, our circular business infrastructure remains pretty fragmented and underinvested, particularly in comparison to some of the leading countries in Northern Europe. We've already talked a lot about the consumption. We've already talked about the very low textile recycling rates, particularly that go textile to textile into new clothing, being below 1%. So what is our technical ability to really be able to support EPR? Does that exist, I suppose, is the question that we've really been looking at through the centre. Some of the estimates that are out there say that while there are pockets of investment, there's 500 million needed to create a fully integrated UK-wide textile sorting and recycling system capable of supporting a full national, fully integrated EPR for textiles. But there's a journey to go on to that. That includes advanced sorting capacity, fibre to fibre recycling infrastructure, digital systems, traceability through digital product passports. You see Europe really pioneering the way. And so at CERIC, what we've really tried to do is work across those gaps, working with businesses like Stuff for Life and others who are, bridging together the industry, the policymakers, the research, developing new technology for fibre recovery, the extraction of valuable materials. One of the things that we've done with Stuff for Life that's been really interesting is not just going after the polyester or the cotton, the bulk material, but actually by value in the garments, many of the other materials are as valuable, if not significantly more valuable. The reflective beads, dyes, pigments, things like that, and being able to extract that additional value. Some of the risks that are associated with fiber recycling as well, and dealing with those. So things like coatings, fluorinated coatings and things like that, making sure they can't leach into the environment. And then the digital systems are also really important, not just technical recycling solutions, both mechanical, chemical, repolymerization are all really important, but also some of the digital tools. One of the things we're really fortunate about at the university is that we host a national digital trade test bed, all about integrating new digital solutions, working with HMRC, Border Force, Customs, partners across the world, WTO and others, really looking at how to integrate circular practices, low carbon practices into the way we do business fundamentally at a government-to-government level. So there's some really good innovation taking place. But future textiles are not just a waste challenge, they're a material systems challenge, and it's going to have to be solved through collaboration, investment, and smart policy together. And that's why I think this call is really exciting today. So thanks for having me.
Cheers, that's great. Thanks, David. Really appreciate that. Okay, so next reminder for questions. So please use the Q&A function. We've had a couple in. The first one actually was about recording. This being recorded, and we will publish the recording. So apologies for any inaccuracies that stay fact forever. Yeah, we will publish the recording of the webinar. Okay, so yeah, get your questions in. I've got one to start off with. So we'll go around the panelists and keep it relatively short. Thanks for keeping your intros short as well. From your perspective, what's the most important thing that needs to happen to address the impact from textiles, clothes, however you want to sort of express it? So if it's all right, David, I think you kind of alluded to that. If we start with you, if you'd like to come in on that one first of all.
Yeah, sure. So for me, it's all about how we think about what textiles are. You know, for me as an engineer, I really try and think of textiles as these engineered materials that have inherent value, that we know the degradation pathways, we know how to design them, and really looking after them. Sally Becken from UK Circular Plastics Network has this great phrase. She talks about, atomic husbandry. Looking after the atoms, you know, really taking care of what goes in. And I think that change, you know, if you look at that layer as, okay, these are materials that have value, we need to look after those materials and keep them in circulation, then mandatory fiber traceability for me becomes essential. Without knowing what it is, where it is, trying to chase after bin bag material is a road to nowhere. Whereas controlling your supply chain, understanding what's coming in, where it's going, and there's some really good practice. You know, you can see in the Netherlands, some of the fiber sort technology, in Sweden, some of the Renewcell technology is really good, but there's still more to be done to prevent polymer downgrading and, you know, really get to a point where we really know what that material is. So for me, number one thing is about traceability.
Great, thanks. Jim, how about you?
Yeah, I think I've just noticed as Rihanna, you've asked a question which sort of relates to this as well about the digital aspects. What we see going into that. I think digitalization of this whole approach to circularity is absolutely essential to being able to identify the sources. And we're using an Arco having to think about what sorts of data it collects at source that doesn't just relate to circularity, but also in support of our ethical trading initiative membership. We have to report our factory sites, the ethical conditions of the labour force. All of this needs to go together with the garment, and I think there's an incredible amount of data, first of all, and how we use that data is something we need to think about, because I think within that data we've got the opportunity to tell the story about low carbon and transition. We've got the opportunity to talk about how well the garment is managed in use, which is a key element of circularity that Arco is focused on. It's not just about what you design and what you make. You know, if you throw that away pretty quickly when it's delivered to the customer, you've lost all of those elements of circularity. So for us, digitalization and being able to manage the life cycle of the garment as it's being used and maximize that is a really key element of circularity, and that needs to be I think that needs to be brought practically into all of the garments that we sell. That's something that we're certainly working towards. And then another element of this is probably of more significance to Arco in traceability and digitalization is how we track that individual garment into end of life. Because we know if we've got the manufacturing and design elements right in terms of circularity, we can take 60% off the carbon footprint straight away. But if we've got a garment which lasts 50 washes in a commercial wash, you only get that benefit of circularity and low carbon if it's washed every single time. And at 50 washes, it's taken out of the stream, and then it might go to a second use. But the ability to track that process and to gain carbon information at each stage is absolutely critical, not just for Arco, but in changing the way that the sector works as a whole. We've done a little bit of that with a construction sector client just recently. We've used RFID tags to look at what's happening, to calculate carbon to the laundry and back. And it's telling a really interesting story actually at the moment. So for me, the most important thing, I think I've drawn it to a close, but the most important thing that we need to do is to think carefully about what data we need, how we're going to implement that data in terms of its collection and the use of technologies like RFID, and then what we do with that data to tell the story and to re-inform the process of manufacturing to make the items even more circular as we go through. So this is an iterative process as well.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with all of that, and I'm working on that previous point. I'll give you a call tomorrow about that. Ruth, can we come to you next? From your perspective, from a national governing body, sports, what would you say is the most important thing?
Yeah, thanks, John, and thanks, Jim. Actually, I think you've stolen some of my words, but I guess I'll start with some things to talk about. So taking action now and not waiting. You know, trying things and learning through them. I guess on our side, we've talked about what one thing we've started to do now, which is provided you know, immense learnings for us and for others across the sector, hopefully. But also we're looking in parallel about how we can make better choices and influence that wider supply chain through our decision making into the future. I guess with sport specifically related to your question, then it is about sport touches people in different ways. We have a relevance and a reach, and it's just how we can then, as Jim said, tell our story through that lens and use the power of sport to engage with people who for whom this sport this topic is really, really important. We know that from our members. We know that from our wider stakeholder groups. So I think I would say for us, it's trying to take action in the way we can for now, rather than waiting for bigger solutions coming down the line. So looking at where we can take action in things that we can control, and then looking at, you know, our power of influence and voice beyond that as well at the same time.
Great. Yeah, no, thank you, Ruth. Again, can't agree more, really. Susie, last but not least on this question, and we've got questions flooding in, so we'll cover a couple more in a minute.
So, I mean, you know, not much more to add on what everyone else has said. And if you go down the questions that I put in the first bit, I think one of the really important things are we can make really conscious choices. This is the one time in our lives we can become influencers in the system, and we can choose where we buy stuff from. Now, if you buy something, you buy a jacket or something like that, there's usually a weak point in there, or you might damage it. I spent ages, you know, racking my head over, like, could I justify buying a really nice, like, winter wrap, you know, big fluffy jacket? So nice. And I lent it to my, you know, daughter. She wraps it around the chain of a bicycle, and there I am with my poor jacket. And I look at, like, you must be able to fix this. Find RAB repair. I send it off, it comes back, you wouldn't know. Absolutely brilliant. And the same thing's gone where, you know, we do a lot of sailing, you wear heavy duty clothing. Jim's going to find that with all the, you know, your workwear and stuff, it'll be a zipper or a popper or a button, or like you'll hide it. Let's just get back to the place where we can repair stuff. Like, you can send stuff back, you can repair it, and the information is there, whether it's an RFID tag or a QR code or something, and we get used to that process. We can fix stuff, or even if we don't want it, there's a, you know, we can send it to a charity store, or, you know, like a website or something like that, and maybe it can get fixed up and sold off again, and somebody will benefit from it. But what are we doing with that end of life, and how can we prolong the life of that garment before we have to give it to, you know, David to become a new product and a new material? Because 100% it's not waste. None of this is waste. It just means you've finished using it, but it is a product to someone else. And we need to change our thinking on that.
Really good point. And I think slowly but surely that is starting to happen. I mean, you know, vintage is a great example, right? So I've got two 16-year-old boys. They spend, well, one of them especially spends quite a lot of time on vintage, looking for the next bargain. And of course, what you're doing is you're buying reasonably high quality things quite often that do have a second time around, because someone might not want it, or they, you know, their lifestyle's changed, or they've changed shape or whatever. And they want to pass it on, and it's good enough to do that. Absolutely good enough to do that. There is an old adage, which I always forget the exact details of, but you know, it boils down to it's more expensive to buy 20 pairs of shoes than it is to buy overall to buy a really good pair of shoes that last 20 years. But of course, it's that initial outlay that's the issue. And for some garments and for some products as well, that servitization piece works really well, because if something is designed to last longer, and or can be, and hence the work with Arco that Arco are doing, can be designed to last longer, then, you know, it can become cheaper to use, or per use it can be cheaper per wear. So, you know, I think it's really important, and addressing a couple of the questions that are coming in. We've got one around how can we turn EPR compliance into a competitive advantage? So that's the first one, by embedding circularity in product design. Great question. And how do we think EPR for textiles will affect consumer behavior? Well, I think they're linked together. Now, this isn't for everybody, and it isn't for everything, but I do see a real opportunity around making products that are much more durable, you know, real strong in terms of design, function, that can still be fashionable and all those other things that are important, but that resilient design, durable design, lending itself to servitization, lending itself to second time around opportunities and so on. That is a business proposition. It's a business opportunity, and it's something that we're already working on, along with, you know, alongside Arco and others. So, you know, that for me is a really important part of it. The consumer behavior piece, I don't know if anyone would like to comment on that aspect. I mean, Jim, you're B2B. Ruth, you know, you're sort of more in the, I suppose, consumer space. I know you're not a consumer expert, but in terms of membership and you know, you describe sport as an opportunity as well, in terms of, you know, engagement with normal people out there, even if they catch their mum's coat in their bike chain. At least it was a bike. But yeah, any sort of comments from you, Ruth, or others on the consumer behavior side of things?
Yeah, I guess it's a big thing for us, right? And we're a membership body, and we have that, I guess, wider customer base and contactable database and people that we talk to. So for us, it's huge, and we've had it back the other way from members that I think, as I said earlier, that it's something that they want to do. And I think the best example is the one you presented. I guess when we put those items in a shop, we didn't know what would happen. We didn't know what would happen. We hadn't done a big market research before we did it to see what might happen. We thought, no, let's do this. We think. But actually, that was exactly the proof point we wanted to see about the engagement we got around it. And it's not just the items that we sold, it's the ones that were sold out, and where can we do more of this, or we like this, and the feedback that we're getting. And I guess we're just and working with you, just in the process of gathering that and working out what we do with it to amplify, I guess, the value of some of the transactional nature of some of the stats I presented, is just to enrich those and bring them to life and be able to play them back. And I think that's the powerful thing we can do next on that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and that whole opportunity in terms of servitization. Yeah, Jim, come in, go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to play back some of the learning that we had on how you might be able to change consumer behaviour, and particularly in a a construction environment. We looked at and tracked some of the garments a major construction customer were using and how long they lived. A pair of gloves lasted anything from 1 to 2 days, and these are sort of 10 quid gloves. Jackets were interesting. An £18 jacket, so the very low end of the market, would last typically about a week and often even less than that. And I think here there's an element of, if you're going for the cheapest, nastiest end of the market, you're buying garments which are uncomfortable from the outset, that don't keep you waterproof. Effectively, you're giving someone, you're telling them that it's a disposable jacket. And when they're finished with it after a few days, just stamp it into the mud. And that's what we've found is actually happening at a lot of construction highway sites in the UK. So when you take that jacket off them and you give them something which costs 50 quid, which is waterproof, performs, it's got an RFID tag in it, it goes to laundry backwards and forwards several times, people's attitude towards that garment changes, and suddenly they're interested in looking after it, keeping it clean, having it repaired instead of throwing it away. And I think for me, we've seen that in quite a large scale trial now with a highways constructor that has shown us that if you can get the marketing right, if you can sell the elements of the garment which are better in some way, they perform better or they're more durable, then you can begin to change that. But it's a really difficult ask. And I know that the challenge that procurement people on this call will have around, look, just go and get me the cheapest alternative because that's all we've got the budget for. But often I feel that that's not the answer. It's about that whole life cost, and being able to express that through circularity is probably my greatest challenge, John.
Yeah, no, it's a really good, and I think, we have to find a way of expressing that, but it's definitely, more broadly is this cost versus value debate. And actually, that's where EPR or regulations in some form come in for my money, which is to balance that out and to, I suppose, explore and point at where the failures, weaknesses, and actual costs lie. Obviously, some of it is about introducing it, making externalities internalized by literally internalizing them as a cost or a fee or a levy. But it's also about pointing at really good stuff. So not to go into huge amounts of detail, but the European system is looking at modulated fees, which would be sort of a reward or penalty program. French have a very complicated system, but it effectively does that. So if you've got things that impact on the performance, the life, or the complexity as well of a garment, then you have a greater fee to pay or a bigger penalty, but also you can't unlock the benefits, which would be simplification, recycled content, and so on, where there are potentially rewards. So that's very complicated because you're trying to do two things. You could just do one or the other, but certainly promoting, longevity, fitness for purpose, simplification of materials, repairability, I think are the things that, we could spend a reasonable amount of time, getting right. And certainly in workwear, we know it will work really well in workwear because of the issues you just outlined, Jim. And then of course, simplification, recyclability, and recycled content. David, just to bring you in on this, if that's okay, really important aspects, and having the push and the pull factor, I suppose. The push being you got to collect it, the pull and pay for it. The pull being we want this recycled content back in a new garment that will last longer, so you're not paying as much at the end because it's lasted longer, right? So over to you, David, just on that point.
Yeah, I think that's the key, isn't it? You need that push and pull. And I mean, I think there's a push because you don't want to landfill and you don't want to pay for landfill and you don't want to record the wastes and everything else. But the pull becomes much more complex because that's where you have to meet a certain specification. The recycler, whether it's fiber recyclate or chemical recyclate or whatever the product is, has to meet a specification. And in different sectors, they are more or less constraining, particularly in, if you go all the way through to chemical recycling and try and completely close that loop. Within Europe, we really only have food grade manufacturing facilities for many of the textile polymer-based materials, which is a pretty significant limiting factor. Now, that's not entirely exclusive, but it does mean that you know, you've got to then get your textile garment with all its dyes and pigments and get it food grade, which is, you know, really over egging the pudding, to be honest. And so, you know, making sure that there is a clear market, that there is a clear supply chain for that market is absolutely key. But that's where, you know, business is beginning to call for recycled content and EPR being used to not just influence materials going in, but to, you know, to really inform a full supply chain thinking. And that's what we've seen in paper be super effective. That's what we're increasingly seeing in batteries. That's, you know, what we're seeing to an extent within plastic, you know, traditional plastics and packaging, though there's still more work there to be realized. You know, we're seeing those infrastructures can be built, and particularly in the continent, we're seeing that they can be built very effectively. But it does require infrastructural investment, and it requires a market pull to begin to specify those materials.
Yeah, and related to that, just to dwell on that for another minute or two, there was a question came in from Alex. Thank you, Alex, about chemical recycling and the role that it might play in the circular economy, and the barriers, non-technical barriers, in moving this forward. So yeah, just to reflect on that for a second, David, if you don't mind, and then maybe Jim as well. I mean, I have my views, and I think they're probably well known, but you know, for the record, you know, there is a role absolutely for non-mechanical and mechanical together. You know, if it can go around in a mechanical loop, brilliant. From time to time, and for more complex garments, we're going to need to go down a chemical route for that ultimate recovery back to monomer, so it can be remanufactured as good as new. So David, do you want to just fill in any gaps there?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's less data on textiles than there is on sort of bottle and packaging plastics, but when it comes to traditional mechanical recycling, optimistically between 8 and 15 times recycling mechanically is where you begin to see significant drop-off in performance. And that drop-off in performance is maybe not in garment performance, but the ability to actually make it, the ability to actually melt it and squeeze it through a die and be able to pull a strand out and it hold together, what we would call its IV. Those sort of things are what begin to drop off. So yeah, I think, you know, there are clearly you want to try and keep as much value in the fiber for as little energy as possible for as long as possible, starting, like you said, right at the beginning with just reselling or rebranding and all of those things that come first before you would even start mechanically recycling. And you probably would want to mechanically recycle simple garments first and reintegrate the textiles. But what I don't really believe in, back to my very first point, is the degradation of the core material value. You know, once it becomes a plant pot and it's been blended with bitumen or something like that, it really isn't much you can do with it. Once you've turned it into a carpet and you've glued a backing onto it that's completely unrecyclable, you've pretty much had it. And so for me, it's about inserting before you get to the point of unrecyclability, and it's just going to go up a chimney because it's not even legal to landfill it. It's inserting it there, a point where you can close that loop and go back to the beginning in an energy efficient way, rather than just continually downcycling it to an unrecyclable point. I think that's the key.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, to come to you, Jim, and then Susie and Ruth, I'll come to you on Dan's question. Dan, thank you for your question, CRWM. Yeah, to Jim, you know, obviously getting to the point of needing to recycle something at end of life as late as possible is the objective, right? You know, within what's safe and reasonable, obviously, in terms of performance. But yeah, the role for chemical and mechanical recycling, to that matter, from your perspective, and getting this stuff into new garments as well.
Yeah, and you know, as a producer of garments, the responsibility for the modulated fees in EPR, if that comes out as we expect, will be on us. So this is the thing that's driving us towards thinking about, you know, look, how do we make this as circular as possible? How do we keep this garment alive, you know, longer than the couple of weeks that some of our trials have noted that this happens, and this has pushed us towards looking at lots of different recycling solutions. To pick up on David's point, we've looked at the opportunities for mechanical recycling, and I think that, you know, there is a place for mechanical recycling of high polyester or high single type garment fabrics, because that produces materials which are potentially useful. My worry is that there are lots of recyclers around at the moment who will offer to take the material away and materially recycle it, or recycle it into the same material. But when you look at what's happening to that, there's nothing stopping it being turned into a fast food Happy Meal toy, or animal bedding. And if you follow the carbon in these cases, it's not very long before this stuff's in landfill or incineration anyway. So I think I'd like to make the point about, you need to be able to trace this and recognize if you're investing in high quality fiber to fiber recycling, like the chemical recycling processes, which we see as the gold standard, then we need to be able to put a traceability element around that. But then the other point, John, I think, which is the one you were alluding to, is that when you look at what some of our customers have produced as end of life, in inverted commas, materials, and you spend the time with the rubber gloves on, sorting through it and finding out, where the vapes are in the pocket and all of that sort of stuff. Probably about 90% of it or more is stuff that is not actually end of life. Some of it's brand new. It's just not been taken out of the packet. There's been a rebrand, or something else has happened. A company's been taken over. So it's just stuff that has got an obvious second life that hasn't yet been thought about. And for me, how you provide a modulated fees system which prevents that happening is as important as doing something really useful with the recyclable material at the end of its life. So I think, and again, from an Arco perspective, that's very much where we're looking at companies like Stuff for Life, who are able to support that in a very practical way, but also the development of the market, because this, for me, we talk about commercial opportunities for circularity. This, for me, is an opportunity for UK PLC. There are lots of organisations. I'm in prisons at the moment for the right reasons, looking at where we can engage with them around building the skills to manage this stuff and to build, that industry around recycling and circularity that we need, and it exists. Yeah. So I think that's my point. And this all ties together through data and traceability.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Jim. Okay, last couple of minutes, last question from Dan, as I alluded to. So, Susie, is it about cost and stuff being too cheap? And how do we sort of manage that transition, I suppose, from your perspective?
It could be if you only looked at the initial purchase cost, and to Jim's point, like it lasts a week and then you throw it away. So you're buying something new, whether you're a consumer or it's a work piece of garment. But actually, if the platform is there that you can rebrand, or you can resell it. So for the likes of Ruth and Sport, like if you can rebrand and there's technology out there to be able to do that, and you can resell that, then actually your original purchase cost is lower, isn't it? And if me as an individual, I buy something that has a better quality, I know it's going to last because I can get the buttons fixed, or this fixed or that fixed, and then I can sell it and the platforms are there. Actually, it doesn't cost the earth, so it potentially is lower cost for me in the future. And the piece for me, and the piece that we can do through Sport, is get those individuals and those athletes standing up and talking about this, like Brentford Football Club, didn't they? Had their shirt over 2 seasons, not 1 season. It was really simple, but they won awards on essentially like it's cut costs, it's better for the fans, it's just a really simple, like, yeah, let's just work for 2 years. Like, and if we can get sport and people to start talking about like that, and start making people think about actually the lifetime cost of something, and actually it's not zero when you throw it away. You might be able to sell it, like you said, on Vinted or wherever, or you have your own shop. So we do have to change mindsets, but we've got to get out of this short-termism. It's a throwaway item, and we need to think much longer, and I think we're definitely shifting in that respect. And I think clothing is one of the things that people are looking at, and like you said, the next generation are definitely, like, they're shopping on Vinted, they're using charity shops, great for charities as well. Like, there's a lot of positives happening at the moment, and we just need to make sure we're manufacturing it for resell, for remake, for repurposing, that it doesn't end up going down the the sort of value chain.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think that for me, on Dan's question, is going to be one of the important parts, and a conundrum to get that right. So Ruth, last word for you, last word for you. A couple of the points that Susie was alluding to there, and so I suppose leading by example.
Yeah, definitely not all about cost, and we'd like to be judged that by our actions. As I said, as we've outlined a few. I think the other thing on top of all the good things Susie's already mentioned is just what we're doing in that sort of supply chain and procurement space about how we make decisions in this area going forward, and maybe have different criteria that people are thinking about at an earlier stage, including what happens to this thing once we're done with it, as well as what logo needs to go on that. Does it really need to? Does it need to go there? What does it need to look like? Etc. Etc. So I think in the tangible actions of things we already have and know we need to do something about, and then there's the I guess just our own awareness and development about how we make decisions in the future and engage in the supply chain on that.
Yeah, and some good progress. And I think, it's been really, really good fun over the last year or so, working through some of this with you, Ruth, with you, Susie, a bit longer with you, David and Jim. But, I personally feel, our mantra is action speaks louder than words, and we are really all living it, together and separately. So yeah, it's been a journey, and we've got a bit of a distance to go, but it's great news that there is an agreed position in Europe on EPR. It gives us something really concrete to focus on. And I know a lot of work, we're already involved in some, a lot of work is already going on into garment performance and durability, repairability and recoverability. So, it's a real positive, I think. But the further we can get up that hierarchy, the better. So thank you for coming along today. Thanks for signing up. Thanks for sticking around. I hope you had your lunch. I hope you had a good morning trying to work out which social media posts were utter twaddle, which ones were actually real. It's a bit difficult at the moment with some of the news to know what's real and what isn't. But anyway, today was extra specially difficult to work it out. But yeah, we are here. We're safely through our first webinar as well as April Fool's Day. And looking forward to the next one. So we are planning to host our second one on green advertising claims, which is something that touches everyone pretty much on the call. You've got to get it right. You need to be genuine. You need to be, demonstrating what's behind a claim. It's one of those things, a bit like most things in life, that isn't hard to do well, but it is easy to mess it up. So we're gonna run the next webinar on green advertising claims and greenwash, how to avoid and not be caught in that situation. So the details will be on our website. You can sign up for our quarterly, we promise we won't spam you, newsletter. So we'll produce the first one this month in April, or the next one rather in April, and they'll go on from there, quarterly, seasonal, which gives me a week or two of latitude to get them out. But yeah, we're really looking forward to more discussion. Please keep in touch. Any questions you've got coming from this, drop us a line. We're all on LinkedIn, as I say, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future. So when I press the sort of stop button, the whole thing will switch off. We won't be able to speak to each other again until we find each other. So it will just drop off a cliff, and have a lovely afternoon.